So our guest speaker this evening is Jennifer Serravallo. Teaching Reading Across the Day is Jen's first book with Corwin. Jen is a New York Times bestselling author, award-winning educator, literacy consultant, frequent invited speaker at state and national conferences, and a former member of the Parents Magazine editorial board. Jen is best known for creating books, including the Reading Strategies Book 2.0 and the Writing Strategies book, which many of you probably have, and resources rooted in research that help make responsive, strategic, differentiated literacy instruction possible for all educators. Jen's books are used around the world, and several have been translated into French, Spanish, Chinese, and Italian. In 2023, Jen launched her podcast, To the Classroom, Conversations with Researchers and Educators, and you can access that on her website, jenniferserravallo.com. Jen holds a BA from Vassar College and an MA from Teachers College, Columbia University, where she has also taught graduate and undergraduate classes. It gives me great pleasure to turn it over to Jen.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank all of you for joining me this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the country, or I should say in the morning if you're around the world. Thank you so much for making time to be with me today. Today is just going to be like our dipping our toe in the water of some of the great stuff that's in this new book, and I have full day. They call them institutes or full day workshops. They'll be online, one in May and one in July. So if you'd like to spend the whole day with me, those are some opportunities to do that. So today we're going to talk about teaching reading across the day. I'm so excited to see people sharing their job titles in the chat box to see we have science teachers here, social studies teachers here, literacy coaches, kindergarten teachers, special educators. This book is for all of you. I tried to make a book that was really applicable, no matter the grade level, no matter the subject area, with the core message that we are really all reading teachers. This is one of the first quotes that you'll come upon in the book. I say, there's an old adage that students learn to read until third grade, and then after that, they read to learn. But in truth, we never stop learning to read, and ideally, we learn from our reading from the very start. I'm wondering how many of you feel like, as an adult even, you're still learning how to read. Like, there's still things about reading that you're learning some things about. And I think as technology changes, or the way we're receiving information changes, the way that we read needs to change. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm learning all the time. Imagine yourself in a high school classroom, your maybe first period English class, and you're deciding to study. Does anyone know what text this is? It's like a pop quiz, it's like Jeopardy all of a sudden, right? On a Monday night, we've got Romeo and Juliet, we've got Shakespeare, and we come to this text, and maybe our teacher's written on the board a do now to sit and try to read the first act independently. And for some students, they're going to be able to read this and understand it. Some students, though, are going to need some real instruction around how do I approach a script. How do I handle Shakespearean language? What do I do when I come to a word I don't understand? Bell rings, we're off to our bio class, second period, and here's our biology textbook. It's a very different kind of reading, isn't it, than reading Romeo and Juliet. We've got this busy page filled with lots of text features. We've got really, I still struggle to with Shakespeare, but this really complex vocabulary. There's a lot of demands on our attention, and just even figuring out where do I put my eyes first, and how do I pull the information from across these two pages together. And then maybe we'll move on to lunch, third period, and our friend takes out a cell phone and says, look, they're lowering the drinking age at Disney World to 18. Can you believe it? And you peek over their shoulder and take a look at the article, and you see that there's hyperlinks, there's facts and figures. This was a real article I pulled off of the internet. But we need to be really critical, don't we? We need to decide, is this true? Can we trust this source? Where is this coming from? Mousetrap news. Can we trust the validity of this source? Is it real? And we need different reading strategies really to help us to tackle that. Although the words are easy enough to read, I can read it with fluency. There's no challenge here from a knowledge perspective, but there's a different kind of reading I need to approach this text. And I'm going to say, even the littlest kids, even your kids in a first grade classroom who might be reading a decodable book or a rhyming poem, On its face might look really simple. This book is one of the wonderful decodable books you can get from Flyleaf Publishers. And it was written to help give kids practice with the NK spelling at the end of words. But maybe you've got some kids in your class who don't know what a plank is, or odds and ends, or the concept of junk and treasure, and how something that's junk to one person might be treasure to somebody else. And suddenly we need support with our comprehension, although this text was really setting us up to practice our decoding. So I think we need to be thinking that we're all reading teachers, right? All subjects, all grade levels, and that understand that reading can be slightly different depending on the context, depending on the text, depending on the reader, depending on the task. I love looking at a really good research-based reader model to help conceptualize all the different things I need to be thinking about as a reading teacher. Some of you may be familiar with this newish model by Duke and Cartwright. Some of you might be thinking about the simple view of reading, or Scarborough's rope, or another model that you're thinking about in your school or studying together in your school. I really love this one because of the inclusion of that green bubble, the active self-regulation, which includes things like motivation and engagement that research has shown are so important to supporting kids' development as readers and becoming a reader over time. Executive functioning skills, which help us to stay focused and attentive and set plans and goals for ourselves as readers. And of course, as you know, when I work around the strategies books, I believe a lot in the importance of explicit, clear, step-by-step strategies to scaffold kids into new work that they're not yet doing. I also love this bridging process, this purple kind of circle in the middle, with the inclusion of like reading fluency, which is really important, and something that can be coached and taught and supported as kids develop. Take a second and look at this if you're not as familiar with it. Maybe you know the simple view or Scarborough's rope and many of the categories in word recognition and language comprehension, cultural and content knowledge, background knowledge. Those are going to seem kind of familiar, right? And I want us to think for a minute of this idea that we're all reading teachers, that kids are learning to read, adults are learning to read, we're constantly learning to read. Is there something on this diagram that you're seeing now that you think to yourself, you know what? We actually do support kids with this at every grade level. We do support kids with this across all subject areas. Or if we don't, maybe we should. It would be helpful if we did. Like, I'll just take motivation and engagement, right? Helping kids to find a way to enjoy the text that they're reading, to really engage and focus their attention on the text that they're reading. That's not just an ELA teacher's job, right? That's not just something that we're doing in K2 classrooms. That's ideally something that's happening in every grade level, in every subject area. What else do you see? You can type it into the chat box, maybe add a little explanation of what you're thinking. Yeah, language comprehension is critical. Even before we're reading, we've got to develop kids' language, right? They need a lot of language input. We have a lot of kids. I taught in New York City public schools. Many of my children were multilingual learners, critically important for them. But even for dominant English speakers, you know, neurotypical children, like everybody needs constant development of their language comprehension. Texts get more complex, vocabulary gets more complex, syntax gets more complex. We've got to help them hear it, listen to it, speak in that way, and be able to read it as well. Yeah, so love vocabulary, absolutely. Vocabulary is not domain specific. It's across content areas and across the grades. Oh, you're not the only one to say that. Lots of people are saying vocabulary knowledge, for sure. Yeah, and that whole section of bridging processes, absolutely. Many are going to become important. And we might find that kids are fluent in one area, or they're fluent as long as the texts are kind of simple, and as texts get more complex, they do need some fluency support. Executive functioning skills, absolutely. So I think that my point is a lot of these, right? A lot of these, we should all be science teachers, social studies teachers, all of us looking at a reader model and saying, what matters for this particular classroom? In what ways can I see myself as a reading teacher? In what ways am I trying to build and develop kids' reading skills inside of this particular content area and inside of this particular domain? Here's another quote from the book. We need predictable, efficient, trusted structures for explicit and engaging teaching. Structures that draw on the research and make room for the art of teaching that can be used in any subject area and with any grade level. So this is a big theme across the book because a good chunk of the book, 9 of the chapters in the book, focus on lesson structures. There's one chapter for each lesson structure. These lesson structures I use across disciplines, right, in any kind of classroom, across grade levels. And I think if you know these 9 and you know them really well, it helps streamline your teaching. It helps make the planning go a lot easier because you know kind of the nuts and bolts of how this particular lesson goes, and you're just plopping in the content. It also helps your kids because they know what's expected of them and what you're going to be doing during each of these different types of lessons. And it just helps your teaching be efficient because I know this lesson should take about 10 minutes. I keep an eye on the clock. I can kind of pace myself, and it makes room and space for time to guide practice and for kids' independent practice. So these 9, I'm going to say, with the exception of phonics and spelling, which I have a chapter on in this book, all the others are really really work in any grade level and really work with any group size. Which diagram? Oh, Carrie, the active view of reading. You know what? You can just Google the active view of reading, Duke and Cartwright, and you can get that model easily off the internet. And even better would be to read the paper in which it was first published. It's called The Science of Reading Progresses. And it's a Duke and Cartwright published by Reading Research Quarterly, I think. It's an ILA publication in 2021. And it's open access, so you can read the article with an easy Google search online too. Okay, so these are my 9. These are my 9 lesson structures. The first one is read aloud, right? So read aloud is something I'm hoping we're all doing across grade levels and across subject areas. This is when I'm taking a text or an excerpt of a text and I'm reading it out loud to kids. But unlike the kind of story time read aloud, maybe that I remember from my childhood, we were all kind of sitting around, braiding each other's hair, listening to story, the lights are dimmed. Those are great too. But the kind of read aloud I write about in this book are really instructional read alouds or interactive read alouds where as a teacher, I've carefully planned places where I'm going to model my thinking. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to guide kids to talk to each other, maybe to stop and jot, act parts out. And I'm really supporting and being really thoughtful about how do I support their comprehension, their conversational skills, their vocabulary development, their knowledge development, all within this lesson. Phonics and spelling. Obviously, we're working on phonemic awareness, helping kids to hear sounds in words, separate those sounds, segment those sounds, blend those sounds together, and using letters to represent those sounds. So spelling the words, making the words with movable letters, and also reading, applying particular, I'll say patterns of English, teaching those different patterns, and then being able to read the words that align to those patterns as well. Next up is vocabulary lessons. This is the first time I've written about this kind of lesson type before. There's going to be vocabulary development in all these lesson types. I even mentioned read aloud lessons. I'm thinking about what vocabulary words am I supporting kids with. Phonics and spelling. I'm going to define words and explain words that we're spelling and we're reading that the kids might not know the meaning of. But a vocabulary lesson takes kind of revisits one of these words that kids have encountered previously in other contexts, either a text or in an activity that you did in the classroom, like a science experiment or a field trip that you went on together as part of social studies. We take these words that they've experienced or encountered, we revisit them, we help them deeply process those words by understanding the different ways you use it. What's the part of speech? Which of these contexts could this word best fit in? Can I put this word in my own sentence? And then also extending and connecting that knowledge of that word to other words that are either connected morphologically because they have similar bases or roots or prefixes or suffixes, or conceptually related. Like we're going to create a concept web of all the words that relate to this word and think about how they're related. So that's a vocabulary lesson. A focus lesson is a new term I've come up with. It's a kind of umbrella term that includes whole class, what you might know as mini lessons, or small group, what you might know as strategy lessons, or one-on-one lessons that are coaching conferences. And what I do in a focus lesson is I really hone in on just one specific strategy that I really want to demonstrate and support kids with. For example, if I know that I've asked kids to take notes on their reading to be able to create a summary, and they're having a hard time with that, I might pull the class together and teach them how to take notes. And I might show them how I have to pause after each chunk of text, think what was that part mostly about, jot something or annotate in the margin before moving on to the next chunk, something like that, right? So really explicit, clear, focused lesson, whole class, small group, or one-on-one. Shared reading lessons. Shared reading, sometimes when you read the research, researchers talk about what we as educators talk about as a read aloud, they talk about as shared reading because you're sharing a book with kids. In this context, and I think for many of the educators who are tuning in tonight, we know shared reading to be when everybody is looking at the same physical copy of a text. It could be a text that I've displayed on a smart board. It could be something on an easel, like a poem, or a big book, an enlarged book. I think a lot of people use digital text now, like slipping something under the document camera or projecting a text. And all eyes are on the same physical copy. And the teacher is facilitating usually choral reading, so everybody reading together, or sometimes echo reading where I model a bit and then the kids repeat what I say. And I can weave in a whole bunch of different kinds of objectives into these lessons. So I love these kinds of lessons to practice fluency, fluent reading, to help kids to apply the decoding strategies and the different patterns that they've learned about in phonics and spelling into connected text reading. It could also be that I'm working on comprehension. A lot of times I'll pause, ask kids to retell what they've read so far, or ask them for the ideas that they have about the text that they've read so far. Expression, which is another kind of fluency, expression or prosody, reading like in the character's voice with a lot of excitement or worry or whatever the character's feeling at that time. Oh yeah, Kathy, the asterisk refers to any subject. I'm not really going to teach phonics in science class, probably. That's what I mean by that. Phonics and spelling is kind of an ELA thing, right? But all the other lesson structures, I teach them in ELA and science, social studies, what have you. Yes, absolutely, Nita. For fluency, build confidence. We get a chance to reread and revisit texts for different reasons. It absolutely builds confidence. Close reading lessons. Close reading was something that people talked about a lot during Common Core. This term close reading became kind of more of a household name. The idea being that we're looking closely, usually slowing our reading down to analyze, to evaluate, to be critical about. It's usually a higher level comprehension that we're going for with close reading lessons. And you may, like in a shared reading lesson, have a large text where everybody's looking at it, or sometimes with close reading, I have kids have their own personal copies too, especially if I want them to highlight or annotate. So close reading, I tend to use more for higher level comprehension skills, and typically in classrooms with older students. Yeah, absolutely, Katarina. It does help kids to see like all the different layers you can see within a text, and sometimes slows kids down and gets them to think a little bit more deeply, for sure. A guided inquiry lesson is when the teacher has an idea of where you want the kids to go with an examination of something, but you're guiding them through asking their own questions and naming and noticing what they happen to see. So I might, for example, some of you may have done a fishbowl lesson before. Have you heard of this, right? Maybe I have a book club that's doing really well with their conversation, and I want the other kids in the class to watch this book club. So I'll put the book club in the center, and we'll all sit around on the outside, and we'll watch this book club and try to notice and name, what are they doing well as conversationalists that we want to try in our book club too? Or maybe show a video of a book club, and the whole class can study it and try to figure out what they're doing well. I also really love guided inquiry for goal setting and reflection. So this is a huge research base showing the importance of having really clear goals for myself as a reader to direct and drive my reading, and also having opportunities to reflect on my work so far to set the goal, and also my work as I'm working on the goal to determine how close am I to getting where I said I wanted to be. So this kind of inquiry into my own work. I look at my work and I say, what am I doing really well, and what do I still want to work on? We can also use guided inquiry to study author's craft, which is another way in. It's kind of like a cousin to close reading. It's another way in to try to get at deeper layers of meaning in a text. So we could look and like, why did the author use that word? What does that do to us as readers? How does that make us think differently about what they're writing about? So that kind of guided inquiry could be helpful as well. Readers' theater lessons. I don't know if you guys follow Tim Rosinski or Chase Young, or have read their new book, relatively new book about the art of teaching. I actually had Tim as a guest on my podcast, and he talked a lot about it. Readers' theater is just super fun. Kids are reading scripts all week long, again and again and again. And at the end of the week, or whenever time's up, whatever that is for you, they do a little low stakes performance. It could be for each other in the classroom, maybe a buddy classroom, a younger grade peer, maybe parents come into the classroom, no costumes, no fancy staging, but they've practiced the script again and again and again. And it leans on the research showing that repeated readings can really support fluency. They help with automaticity. They help kind of scaffold kids into reading more complex words of what they'd be able to read just on one go, all on their own. They have the support of peers. And so what I'm proposing in this chapter is that we also teach into the times when kids are practicing. We listen to them and we coach them and we give them support and helping them, if it's the first time they're getting a script, helping them to really understand all the words in the text and make sure we're comprehending so we can read with good prosody. Or if they've been practicing for a little while, maybe it's to coach in for helping with the expression or, reading the stage directions to help those direct the reading and the way that you're reading. And then the 9th one are conversation lessons. So I think it's really important that kids get lots of opportunities in pairs, in small groups, in whole class to talk about their reading. There's lots of research here too on the importance of leaning on conversation to help us deepen our comprehension. But not all kids are going to be great conversationalists about books right off the bat. So teaching them strategies, modeling for them, guiding them, being part of the conversation to really help them to do that conversation even better. Oh yeah, Flipgrid. I used that a lot during the pandemic. That was a flashback. Absolutely. But it's great. I saw, was it Penny Kittle and Kelly Gallagher presenting, I don't remember where, NCTE or something. And they were talking about how they did book clubs across the country. Penny was teaching in New Hampshire and Kelly was teaching in Anaheim, California. And they would have their, obviously different time zones, and they'd have their kids read the same text, very different populations of kids too. And they would talk about this text across time using Flipgrid to converse back and forth. That's kind of cool too. Just kind of brought that memory back from Margaret. Thank you. So each of these lessons has a proposed predictable structure, clear pacing and timing, and recommendations within each part of kind of how this part goes. So for read aloud, for example, I'm proposing you start with establishing a focus. What are we going to be studying together or practicing together when reading this book? You read aloud to kids and engage them, planning out what am I going to say, what opportunities will the kids have to respond to each other in partnerships, talking, jotting. And then at the end, I wrap up some takeaways that are bigger than even just this book that I want them to carry forward into their content studies or into their continued reading. And very simple lesson plans, 1-pagers. I don't think we need like 6-page scripts for lessons. We need like a simple, series or a series of actions just to kind of notes for ourselves to be able to plan or take notes right on this same planning form to record how that lesson went or what we do differently next time. And then once we have this really predictable, clear structure, and we know each of these 9 structures, we can think about how do we build knowledge and vocabulary within the read aloud. How do we choose texts that are going to be appropriate or make sure that the texts that we're reading are just right for this particular lesson structure? How do we offer kids clear strategies and what does that sound like? And what's the teacher language that I would plan out ahead of time? Or how am I going to prompt kids to be able to participate during the lesson? And this is a big theme throughout the whole book, really important as well. How do we respond? How do we listen in a way that we're kind of anticipating and being ready to shift gears, to increase support, to lessen support, to nudge them along, to change course. So I offer advice in each lesson structure for that as well. In all 9 of them, I'm leaning on research into engaging explicit instruction. Folks that did this research are people like Hollingsworth and Ybarra, Rosenshine, Archer, Hughes. You may know some of these researchers and practitioners' names. And they each have identified these principles of effective instruction. I'm adding engaging because it matters a lot to me that the kids are highly engaged, which means that they are interested in what I'm teaching, but also that they're highly participatory, that they're doing a lot of the work during the lesson. And so if you look at these different researchers and practitioners' books and articles, you'll see 14, 10, 9, all these different principles of instruction. These are the ones that I'm leaning on in this book. The first one is that we're always thinking about our kids. So when we're planning a lesson, we're thinking, what do my kids know? And what's new in this text that I need to purposefully plan to connect the new knowledge to the known knowledge? And so even if you're working with a core curriculum, you might need to tweak what it says in there. You might need to do a little bit of planning, right? To think about that particular kids that you have and how to make that connection possible for them. Feedback's huge. We talked already about the importance of responsiveness and that I'm listening to kids and I'm responding to what they need in the moment. Giving lots of opportunity for kids to collaborate and talk to and work with one another, and also bridging to independent practice. I've already talked about how I believe a lot in strategies, breaking things down into really clear steps. So any big concept that I want them to understand or any big skill that we're working on, I'm going to be breaking things down into very clear, concrete, doable, actionable steps. Over time, releasing responsibility again so that they can become independent. And I'm thinking about how I want to introduce the new content, whether it's a demonstration where I'm thinking out loud and showing what my product is or what I'm doing. I'm offering a model, like here's an example of what we're trying to do. Let's talk about how we got to this example. Explanations and really clear instructions so that there's no confusion and everyone's able to access the learning. Active engagement, often throughout the lesson. I read something in one of these researchers' papers that, let me see if I can get this right. I actually wrote it down because I get the numbers wrong all the time. Kids have to have many opportunities to respond. The kids should be practicing. Oh, no, I didn't write it down. I thought I did. I think it's something like, I'm not going to say the numbers. I'll mess it up. I'm not good with numbers. But many opportunities to do simple responses like a thumbs up or hold up a number card or something like that. And then a few opportunities to do more extended responses, which could be jotting about their thinking or turning and talking during the lesson. We want to just keep kids really actively. They're not passively watching the teacher do the work or watching us do lots and lots and lots of explaining. We want to get kids working so that we can guide practice and give feedback. And then, of course, we're thinking about scaffolding. We're not giving scaffolding where it's not warranted. If the kids seem to be getting it, we pull back and allow them to have more independence. But of course, as things are difficult, we're thinking, how much support do they need and how can I best help them? I'm just curious to hear, after listening to those 9 lesson structures and thinking about these elements of explicit instruction, if anything stands out to you, if anything's like confirming, like, yes, I do that, or that really jives with what I'm trying to do in my classroom. Any comments or thoughts about this so far? Oh, and I see Rebecca's put the link to that article with the active view in the box. Thank you. Seeing some thumbs up, using your emojis. Awesome. Yeah, pair or trio reading. So like using a script then can become a reader's theater. Affirmation, awesome. Clear steps, yeah. Oh, Jennifer, the link is in the chat thread. Exactly, Dawn. It's just like good teaching. I think a lot of people know me for my strategies books, which are big collections of lessons and strategies that we offer to kids. This is really about like our instructional strategies, the structures we're using, the methods we're using, the teacher moves. Absolutely. Oh, I forgot the last one, differentiating to meet students' needs. That's one's important. Making sure that we're thinking about all the kids in front of us and really influenced by the universal design for learning principles, that I'm thinking, how can I help all kids to access what it is that I'm working on? And that might mean modifying the scaffolding or offering different entry points for different kids. So I think that there are probably times when you're using your core program, you're using your textbook. Some of you might be making your lessons from scratch, and those lesson structures can absolutely help. You're going to get advice in here for what text to choose, what lesson structures, and you're going to hit the ground running, and hopefully it's going to make your planning be a lot easier. But some of you might be in a situation right now where you have a new core program, or you're a science teacher and you're working with a science textbook, or you have trade books that you're using. You don't really have a lot of choice of the materials that you're using. I'm going to propose to you that sometimes the general lesson that's in the book might be just fine. The text that they're offering might be just fine. But given your unique set of kids, you might need to up or down the level of support. And by choosing a different kind of teaching structure, it can help you do that. So for example, let's say this is our science textbook, and it's honestly too hard for the kids to read by themselves. I was planning to assign it for homework. Maybe I assigned it for homework last year, it was fine, but this particular group of kids, they're coming in, they're not clear on the concepts from their reading, they're having a really hard time. So what are we going to do? Like, what might we do? How might we use a lesson structure, one of the ones that I've just explained so far, to give them access to the content in that text, maybe to teach them strategies for how to handle this complex text so that they can start to read it with more independence? What would you pick? Yeah, Joseph, I could choose a focus lesson. I could say, let me teach you how to handle this text and teach a really clear strategy for handling it. That could work. Carrie, yeah, I think I would pick close reading. I think that's what I picked. Yeah, I picked close reading. Put it under the document camera. Let's all look at it together, or everyone bring your textbook to the carpet. Let's put it on your lap, or gather around together at your desks, and let's take a look at it. And we're going to read. I'm going to read it out loud to you, maybe, or I'm going to have you read it in pairs. And we're going to pause a lot, and I'm going to support and scaffold your understanding of this text as we go through with questions and strategies and stopping places along the way. How about this one? I've got a class of a lot of multilingual learners, and I have this beautiful book that I've selected because it's aligned to our social studies unit and what we're studying, and I really want to read this book, but to be honest, there's some vocabulary in here that's quite challenging, and I can't just, skim right past it. What would you do? It's a whole class novel. Maybe normally I'd have the kids read it, or I'd do some read aloud. What would I do? Which structure might help me in this particular situation? Definitely vocabulary lesson. So I would really be thinking of some advice in the book about how do I even choose which words of all the words I could choose? Which words am I going to choose? How am I going to teach them really clearly? I might choose to I might use shared reading or read aloud to really give them that extra support, reading it to them or reading it with them to give them extra help, not just assign it for independent reading. I picked vocabulary lessons here, but all of these are good. Let's think of the opposite end of the spectrum. I've got these kids in my class, and they just seem really bored, quite honestly. I'm moving too slow for them. They could read that book all on their own, and we're going slowly for the majority of the kids that need that extra support. What would I do with them? Do they have to sit there through the lessons going at the same pace? I don't think so. What could we do? Yeah, so if I'm splitting the class and doing what, how am I giving these kids a more accelerated pace? Oh yeah, maybe Megan, maybe we're going to do some readers theater. Could be. I like the idea of a book club, Morgan. Yeah, why not, right? How about you read on your own? And while I'm guiding these kids through it, you all can meet as a group and have some book club conversations. Or yeah, Carrie, I could do guided inquiry, help them uncover deeper layers in the text, and then maybe they read it on their own and come together to discuss. What did I pick? I picked conversation lessons. So the idea is that these structures, right, each of these structures have different purposes. And each of these structures are going to help me give the right amount of scaffolding at the right time. And I'm thinking about the text and the task and the readers to make decisions on a case-by-case, text-by-text basis of what I'm going to do. I have two, I couldn't decide which question to pick. These are two completely different questions. You can jot in the chat box to let me know. Of these, are there some that you use a lot, some that you might want to use more? Any that sound new to you that you're intrigued to find out more about? Or answer this question, can you think of a challenge you're having right now where the lesson type, changing the lesson type might be part of the solution? So Stephanie, you do a lot of close reading. That's interesting. Yep, Denise, close reading and shared reading. Anna wants to add in more conversation lessons. Oh, they're so engaging for kids. They're naturally social, right? They just want to talk to each other. So if we can put some really good structures around it to make sure that they're really getting a lot from their reading during those conversation lesson times, gold. And then we've got Kathy who uses a lot of conversation lessons with adults. Yeah. Yeah, but I'd say kids need it just as much as adults do, I think. We have to give them the support to do it well, and they can get so much from it. Absolutely. Yeah, Katerina. So you have a wide range in your classroom. I don't think I mentioned this. Oh, no, I did kind of. But all of these lesson structures can be used whole class, small group. I mean, I guess technically you could read aloud to one. It's what I do with my kids at night, right? You could do a read aloud for one. But in the regular classroom, I'm thinking most of these are whole class or small group. You can do a whole class read aloud. You could do a small group read aloud. You can do a whole class shared reading lesson, a small group shared reading lesson. So when you have this huge range of needs, and that was my experience, New York City, 35 kids, third grade class, ranging from a first grade to a fifth grade level, all in the same class. We have this common text we all have to read. What am I going to do with that, right? And I think that one of the ways is to think about different lesson structures, supporting kids in different ways with different levels of support. These are such great answers in the chat box. Thanks, everybody. Another big theme throughout the book is the importance of using clear reading strategies to support skills while also supporting vocabulary and knowledge. It's not, it's both and, not either or. So one of the things I talk about and I show throughout the book is how we can be planning, even in ELA lessons, for content and knowledge building, and even in science lessons for skills and strategies for reading. All of them should go in all the lessons in all the different content areas. So for example, if I was taking a look at Romeo and Juliet, and I was looking through that lens of what are the knowledge and vocabulary goals that I have for kids? What are the things that the words they need to understand? And what are the literacy goals around, like how to read a script, or how am I visualizing when I'm reading a play, or how do I infer about the characters to try to get to know them as individuals and remember who they are from scene to scene, right? Those literacy goals I might teach through strategies and asking questions as we read. And the knowledge and vocabulary goals, I need to think about those as well. And I might talk and think aloud, or again, prompt them to think about using context, or teach them strategies to be able to do that. So I'm thinking knowledge, vocabulary, and literacy at the same time. I have this little quick clip of me teaching fourth graders in a reader's theater lesson. This is in a co-taught classroom, and some of the kids in the group, actually, the kids in this group had different goals. Some of them were really working a lot on decoding, some are more fluency, but I pulled them together and I assigned them parts in this script based on what their goals were going to be. I'm just going to show you a 1-minute clip of the longer, I think it's like a 7 or 8 minute video, where I'm helping them to read the script for the first time. And in the chat box, can you share, what are you noticing I'm teaching about concepts or vocabulary or content? And what am I teaching them in terms of skills and strategies? And this is a script adaptation of the story Brave Irene. So it's a fiction, it's a narrative, but still there's concepts, vocabulary, and content as well. So let's have a quick watch. You might want to turn on your closed captioning or turn your volume up. The kids are a little bit soft-spoken. And then I invite you to share it in the chat box what you notice.
Irene insisted. She crossed her mother into bed, covered her with 2 lines, and added a blanket for her feet.
Okay, let's read this one together. This word here, she coaxed. Can everyone say coaxed?
Coaxed.
Coaxed. She coaxed her mother into bed. Does anyone know what coaxed means?
No, I think I know what it
Yeah.
means. Like she covered her into bed.
Yeah, she thinks she kind of like helped her or kind of like made her move into bed. She coaxed her into bed. Like, come on, let's go. Let's get into the bed. She coaxed her mother into bed, covered her with 2 quilts. Put your finger on the word quilts. Quilts, yeah. Covered her with 2 quilts and added a blanket for her feet. Okay, can you read that line for us one more time? She coaxed her mother into bed, covered her with 2 quilts, and added a blanket for her feet. Beautiful. Okay, there's a lot more to this lesson, but just in that little 1-minute snippet, can you pick out some things that I was trying to support them with in terms of concepts, vocabulary, knowledge building, content, and things I was trying to help them with in terms of reading skills? And you can even think back to the active view of reading diagram. Yeah, the reading with her is to give her some auditory feedback as she's reading as well. And remember, this reader's theater, they're going to be practicing the script over and over and over and over again, and they're going to develop automaticity with those more complex words, some of which, as you saw, she had a hard time decoding on the first go. We got the vocabulary, yep. Intonation, a little bit, yep. And I tucked in a little bit of a definition. And I'm really trying to help them with fluency, absolutely. Tone, repeated reading. So it's both and, right? It's skills, strategies, content, knowledge, all of it. Let's look at this one and I'll ask you, let's say you're the bio teacher, right? What are your knowledge goals? What are your reading comprehension goals? What are your goals for understanding text features? What do you think? It's maybe hard to see, but there's a lot of very hard words in here that kids are going to need a little bit of support with. And in terms of literacy goals, and you can see this heading says comparing fibrous and globular proteins, like how to handle, compare, contrast text structure, integrating text features with the main text, answering key questions. And we can't just assume that kids are going to be able to know how to do all these things. They're going to probably need support and explicit instruction to help them. I have one more little clip for you. This is a 2nd grade shared reading lesson. The class is in a unit on urban and rural. And I have a text that's about urban and rural communities. And we're going to read this as shared reading and see if you can tell what skills and strategies and what content and knowledge am I supporting the kids with. One of the things I noticed when we were reading this page, everybody, is we were reading it really like word by word, just to make sure we got the words right, which is a good idea. But now I want to pay attention to the commas. Do you see the commas there? I want you to notice them, right?
I saw periods.
And there's periods at the end of the sentence. But what about these commas? What should we be doing in the comma? Does anyone know?
Take a breather.
Take a little breather. Can I read it for you so you can hear what that sounds like? See a sports event or eat out. Did you hear the commas?
Yeah.
Can you try that now? Here we go.
In a city,
There's a lot to do and see. You can shop, go to a museum in an urban area. So what are all the things we've learned so far about what it's like in an urban area or the city? What do you remember? Can you turn and retell to your partner? It's true, that is true. And what else did you learn from the text?
They live in small areas.
Small buildings. Big buildings, but they have small space, right? A lot of people in a small space. So as we're reading, we have to also make sure we're thinking, we're learning information on every page. So before we turn the page, we'll just take a minute and make sure. Did we understand that? Yeah. Okay, here we go. Okay, so again, super quick clip, just 2 minutes of an 8-minute lesson, but look at all the stuff you put in that chat box, right? That I very carefully thought about. What am I trying to help kids learn in terms of content? And how am I helping to develop them as readers through fluency, through comprehension, monitoring for meaning, checking in, summarizing, the vocabulary, holding them accountable to the text. There's so much in just that short little clip. We'll skip this one. We'll skip this one too. So I want you to think of a subject area right now. If you're a literacy teacher, maybe you're thinking about ELA. If you're a science teacher, maybe you're thinking about your science classroom. If you teach everything, if you're an elementary school teacher like I was, you taught every subject. Think about how your balance feels right now between teaching skills and strategies and teaching content and vocabulary. Does it feel a little tipped in one area more than another, or does it feel pretty well in balance? What do you think? And just reflect on that. You can share in the chat box if you wish. Yeah, I think there's a certain way that the ELA classroom goes that sometimes feels like it's tipped a little bit more toward the skills and the strategies, where the text that kids read, maybe if all kids are reading the text that they choose, or the teacher's moving from text to text, there might not be as deliberate content building. Or in the content classroom, it's probably the opposite sometimes, right? We're thinking a lot about the kids have to learn this information about globular proteins or whatever that was, right? And we're pushing the content. And if we think about like, how can I also balance that with a little bit of reading skills and strategies work, it could really help kids to access more and then learn more of the content themselves, because that knowledge begets knowledge, and they're going to be able to, when they read with more care and more skill, they'll be able to learn from the text independently too. So I want to say that, I worked with these two incredible research assistants. We scoured over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies, and I have pulled for you in this book, I think there's over 300 citations to peer-reviewed research. So everything in here is very grounded in the research, and I very much respect research. I understand why we look at research. Here's an example of what it looks like. In each chapter, you have these 1 or 2 pagers that summarize the key research finding over the last few decades about this particular principle that I'm talking about in this chapter. So there's a whole chapter on engaging explicit instruction, for example, and that's the research summary for engaging explicit instruction, a whole chapter on phonics and spelling, right? So we've got a research summary there. So the research is there. Happy to send you articles. I have them all in a Google Drive if you want to read any of them. But I also want to say that so much, the teacher matters so much. The researchers, they do a great service by helping us think about what's most likely to happen with this particular intervention, or if we do this particular thing. But the stuff that we know as educators, because we're in classrooms with kids every day, the kinds of ways that we learn about kids and the ways they're going to respond from the patterns that we see, that matters a lot too. In fact, should I say it matters even more sometimes? And I wanted to give support in this book to make sure that there's support for us in our decision making. And yes, we're honoring the research and we're basing it on the research, but we're also making a lot of decisions as well. So this research backing, this lesson planning, the stuff we think we're able to anticipate, absolutely critical. But you get into that lesson, and we've all had a situation. Every lesson is like this, right? We have to change course. We have to be ready to change on a dime because something didn't go quite as well as we thought it would. The kids are looking at us like they're confused. We have to back up and rewind and demonstrate. Or the kids look like they're kind of bored, so we pick up our pace, right? We're constantly making these adjustments, and it's critical that we're not just following any program as a script or just following what the research has told us. If the kids in front of us look like they're not getting it, right? We know what that looks like. So this is what some of the support that I'm offering in the book is a section in each chapter called responsive teaching. And this is really just, from the many years of experience I have working with my own students and also working in classrooms around the country, what are the things that are likely to happen? And I present it as an if-then chart. Like, if you hear this, or if this particular situation happens and you observe it, here's something that you might say in the moment. And they're a little bit unique to each of the different lesson types, how I would adjust, how I would say something back, how I would prompt, how I would redirect, right? And I'm inspired by, I'm like the least athletic person you'll ever meet. So I never have had this experience firsthand, but watching Friday Night Lights, maybe some of you have this experience, they watch game tapes, right? They watch other sports teams before they're going to play them to try to figure out what all their moves are. They watch their own games to try to figure out what went well. Yeah, clear eyes, floor, can't lose. They watch their own games to try to see what they can do a little bit better. And I think we need to do this too, like as teachers, right? Like watching, my practice changed so dramatically when I got into other teachers' classrooms and got to watch them, or when I had coaches coming into my classroom with my kids and showing me what it can look like. And I was able to go into classrooms. I spent 2 days in classrooms, recording lessons. I was in kindergarten through 8th grade classrooms, science, social studies, and ELA. I filmed 23 videos in 2 days in 2 schools in a bunch of different classrooms. So these are all like hand to God, honestly, like one take, no retakes, almost no editing. And I really wanted to show you just real teaching. I mean, I wasn't these kids' actual teacher, so their own teacher had a little bit of a leg up, but I was a visitor in the classroom. I learned about the kids from the teacher. I did the best I could to plan a lesson, and I showed you the lesson plan as it was. And then I'm showing you my reflection. So these call outs here on the lesson plan after you watch the video are the things that I would have done a little differently. Like I'll say in some of my reflections, I wish I had done a better job establishing the focus. I could have done that a little better like I had planned. It didn't kind of come out how I wished it was. Or I loved their responses and I felt like they were ready for more of a challenge. So that's why I deviated from my plan and I gave them a little bit more of a push. Or I planned to have them just share as a group, but some of them were a little shy and quiet. And I thought if I have them turn and talk to each other instead, that'll get more kids talking. So I made that adjustment on the spot. So I'm trying to sort of crack open my head and my decision-making a little bit so that I'm seeing your comments. Students need to know the learning target. Absolutely, that's the establish a focus at the beginning. But I'm trying to crack open my brain a little bit for teachers who are watching these videos they're not perfect examples. I could have made them perfect with the magic of editing, but I wanted to show reality and I wanted to show my reflections and what I might have done differently or what I would do differently next time. So of the 23 I recorded, 22 ended up in the book. They're K-8 and ELA, science, and social studies. And you can see from this list, there are several in each chapter. And I tried to do both whole class, small group, and some one-on-one occasionally as well. I also have at the start of each chapter an annotated lesson, like a vignette, like a story of a lesson, also with annotations. So it's another way to study the teaching moves, the decision-making, and the elements of each of these different lesson structures. So I'm just curious about this. Do you feel like you have, if you're an administrator, are you supporting your teachers to make adjustments to programs, to be responsive to the kids in front of you, to scrap lessons, change lessons? If you're a teacher and you're in the classroom, do you feel like your administrator understands the need to make these modifications, be responsive, reflect at the end of a lesson, make changes for next time? What do you think? I thought it would be interesting just for all of you to read one another to see the differences. Some do, but not all. Lots of leeway, not much. Yes, luckily, so important. Well, I hope in this book that there is enough research support for administrators to think about how critically important this is. There's actually a blog by Tim Shanahan. He just released it on Saturday, and he talked about how critical this is too. He and I are on the same wavelength about this. He talks about how even a program that he wrote, he was glad to see a teacher making adjustments, and that's really what expert teachers do. And it's what's necessary to modify a program that was planned without the kids, without knowing who those kids are. The expert teacher needs to be flexible and responsive and make these adaptations and adjustments. So hopefully, get that blog post if you're trying to advocate for more of this flexibility and responsiveness for yourself and for your own lessons. All right, so I wanted to share again just some ways to stay in touch, and then we will do the book giveaway. So again, I have a full day workshop where we'll dive into each of these lesson structures in a lot more depth. If you're interested in joining me, one's coming up in a few weeks, May 15th. By then, hopefully people that have pre-ordered will have the book in their hands. They should be shipping in about a week, and then another in July, if that's a better time when you don't have to worry about sub coverage and things like that. On my website, I have a blog, and I've written a couple of blogs. Today's blog post that I just released was about responsive teaching. Last week's was about lesson structures. So I invite you to check that out. There's also information here about how I can support you in schools if you're interested in that. Free printable resources like study guides and printables like that you can use in your classroom, things like that. So you can go exploring. And as Rebecca mentioned in the introduction, my podcast, you can also find that on my website. I interview researchers that study everything from strategies to fluency to teacher effectiveness versus high quality instructional materials to the importance of knowledge building to vocabulary. So I've had some amazing researchers in conversation with me. And the second half of every episode, I talk with educators. We talk about how do we bridge this research to practice. I haven't gotten the energy to do a third season yet, but there's 2 seasons, lots of great episodes. So I invite you to check that out. Oh, thanks everybody for the podcast love. On Twitter and on Instagram, please follow me if you'd like to stay in touch. And Corwin has launched a new Facebook page called Serravallo and Corwin on Literacy, where there's going to be tips, video clips, things like that. So if you'd like to follow that, if you're on Facebook, we invite you to join that community as well. And I would love to hear any questions, feedback, maybe in the last minute or two, while Rebecca gets the lucky winner's name ready for the book giveaway. Let me just skim the chat, see if there's anything I can answer for you. Yeah, Janet, I think this book will help you in high school, certainly. I said K-8 just because all of the samples in the book are K-8 videos, but absolutely, the principles apply through high school, 100%. The lesson structures you can use in high school, absolutely. If you get a copy, I'd love to hear your feedback and what you think about that. Let me see if there's any other questions. Yeah, I do. Thank you for saying that. I think it's really important to, and I do this when I'm lucky to be in schools with teachers too, and I'm doing staff development. I will model a lesson and I'll say, okay, so here's what I think went well. Here's what I would do differently next time. I think it's important for everybody to model that. If you're lucky to be an instructional coach and you're in classrooms, to do that. If you're a teacher, I think it's so valuable to open up the doors of your classroom, invite colleagues in, have your literacy coach come in, get feedback, have a thought partner to reflect together with. We develop these muscles of responsiveness over time through repeated practice, and hopefully through books like this and opportunities to spend the time together, like in professional development or in a webinar, and just kind of think through, how would I do that? How would I do that differently? Oh, a new teacher. Awesome. Welcome to the best profession ever. Angela, the videos are all included in part of the book. So as you're reading the book, there's actually pages that tell you to stop and watch the video. And then you get to see my lesson plan and my reflections. And there's little QR codes. You can just scan them. Video pops up on your phone and you can watch it as you're reading. So I really designed this book to be kind of multimodal in that way, that you're reading a little bit and then you're watching video clips and then you're interacting with those video clips. Kathy, yes, there will be a guide to share with teachers. It is being finalized, copy edited right now, and hopefully it'll be out very soon after the book is out. The book should be out in like 8 days. So I'm not sure if the guide will be out just in time for that, but very soon after. Hopefully, this is the perfect book to read with colleagues. So hopefully you get that study guide and you follow the plan and you're able to read it together, as a grade level team or as a whole school. Edna's asking about in-person workshops. I'm actually driving up to Massachusetts on Thursday night. I'll be doing an in-person workshop at the Massachusetts Reading Association conference. I'm going to Florida in June, doing something in person there. You can check out my website, my speaking calendar is there, and you can see where I am. I do most of my full day workshops though online, just for this very reason. Like today, we have people from all over the world. Everybody's able to access it. You have the recording, and I find, in today's challenging times with not too many substitute teachers available, this allows people to participate, even if sub coverage was challenging. So I don't do as many, but I do some, and you can check out my speaking calendar.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Happy Passover to those who celebrate. Take care.